I'd like to welcome you to the third set of morning presentations, and this morning we are fortunate to have Dr. Russell J. Hendel speaking to us, a discipline-independent approach to a higher cognitive, and
I have a wrong presentation there.
And at any rate, Dr. Hendel holds a doctorate in theoretical mathematics from MIT,
Wrong presentation.
an associateship from the Society of Actuaries, and is in a doctoral program at the Spertus Institute for a degree in Jewish Studies. He is currently an adjunct faculty member at Towson University, which has recently become a center of actuarial excellence. His research and publication interests include discrete number theory, actuarial science, biblical exegesis, the theory of pedagogy, applications of technology to pedagogy, and the interaction of mathematics and the art. He regularly reviews books for the Mathematical Association of America. And I will welcome Dr. Hendel.
It's wonderful to be here. That is the title of my talk. That's my affiliation, and that's the conference, and everyone knows that. So let me begin with a broad overview. My title is A Discipline-Independent Approach to a Higher Cognitive Pedagogy. And I underlined some words here. And can people hear? Can you hear? Good. And I just wanted to go over what I'm going to talk about today. First of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a simple technique to assess whether something's higher order and whether to create higher order. I'll give examples from mathematics, writing, and foreign language, but it applies to anything. But these are three very diverse disciplines. It's content independent. And we think of cybernetics, which deals with information flow, independent of realization. So I'll speak a little bit about cybernetics. And it's higher cognitive. People use that term all the time. I'm connecting higher cognitive with executive function, and I'm connecting executive function with multidimensional processing. And we'll spend some time on them. As you see, I've put superscripts there, and that indicates the outline of my talk. First, I'll give a little bit talk of cybernetics, which is content-independent flow. Then I'll speak a little bit about executive function and multidimensionality. I'll then give some examples. I'll then go into mathematics, writing, and foreign language. I'll then compare what I've done with the traditional Anderson-Bloom taxonomies and several others. And if I haven't run out of my 35 minutes, I'll show you some simple ways to take routine mathematical problems and make them higher cognitive. So let's begin with cybernetics. That's the URL for the American Society of Cybernetics, ASC, and you can find lots of definitions. You found about 15 of them. Originally I had all 15, but I just have so much time in the lecture. Cybernetics is the organization of the whole. It's the communication between parts of a complex system independent of content. And therefore, each complex field has its own cybernetician. For example, anthropology is a complex field with lots of parts, and there's information flow. So Margaret Mead contributed to cybernetics from that field. And economics, computer science, psychology, all these fields are complex, and they all had contributions for cybernetics. I've been most influenced by a person named Ashby. He was a psychologist. And one of the things he emphasized was he went away from the discussion of higher order concepts. He replaced them by mechanistic concepts. He wasn't against complexity, but he didn't like people saying, well, the human brain is higher order, because that has no operational meaning. And I'm going to try and be very specific and operational today. Almost everything I've said is known, but I'm going to try and be specific, and I think that's my novelty. I'm going to define pedagogy as the content-independent information flow within a system of knowledge that maximizes the learning experience. But this is the setting for what I'm doing today. I'm looking for descriptions of information flow that have nothing to do with the content of a system. I'm going to show you which information flows give rise to higher order, and then I'll show you how that applies to mathematics, writing, and foreign language, and then any other discipline you want. I now have to talk about executive function. Most people talk about higher order, but they don't connect it with the brain. When Bloom came out in 1950, we didn't know that much about the brain. Today we do. The executive function is a paradigm example of higher order brain activity. I'm going to define executive function by what the performance executive function tests measure. So instead of asking, I saw lots of definitions of executive function. There are about 8 definitions. There are different aspects of it, but I'm going to look at several performance tests. All of them have something in common, and that's what I'm going to use as the basis for my talk. There are other aspects, and I will not be talking about them. I'm going to define executive function as continually processing several dimensions, selecting the predicting dimension and ignoring other dimensions. And I'll show you how the tests measure this, and then I'm going to apply this definition to pedagogy. I'm going to define higher cognitive as executive function, which is continual multidimensional processing of predictors. So let's look at the first test. I'm going to look through 3 performance tests. There are also open-ended tests, but I'm going to look through these tests. This is the Wisconsin card sorting test. In the Wisconsin card sorting test, if you're taking it, you're going to be flashed 60, 70, 80 cards like this. It was developed in the 50s. And the first row has 4 cards, the second row has 1 card. Now let's look at the first row. There are 4 cards there, and you're asked to guess which of the 4 cards is closest to the bottom card. So let me show you this, and as I show it to you, you'll see why this deals with executive function. The 2 Ds do not resemble the A at all. The 2 Ds resemble the 2 Bs in the dimension of number. They both have 2, and therefore the bottom card is closest to B from the point of view of the dimension of number. The 2 Ds resemble the 3 Cs from the dimension of color. They are both red, nothing else is red, so the 2 Ds are closest to C in the dimension of color. The 2 Ds resemble the 4 Ds in the dimension of letter. The actual Wisconsin card sorting test uses shapes. Now, you're taking this test, and you have to guess whether number, color, or letter is driving the answer. And you play around a little bit. Maybe you have some wrong answers. Finally, you have a right answer, and you're very excited, and you have a streak of right answers. The computer then changes the right answer, the predictor, and you have to adapt to it and find out what the new right answer is. And the way the test is measured is by seeing how many streaks of right answers you have and also seeing how long it takes you to adjust. Those are both attributes of executive function. If you've had damage to your frontal lobes, for example, and you originally guessed number and someone changes to color, you would find it very difficult to change. Let's look at 1 or 2 other tests. This is the Stroop interference test. The test is very simple. It asks you to name the letter of color. So I think I can do that. That's yellow, blue, white, green, red, orange. It looks clear on my computer. If you look on the second side, it's also yellow, blue, white, green, red, orange, except on the second side, there's something called Stroop interference. Stroop interference means that the meaning of the word blue is interfering with the color of the word blue. So you have 2 dimensions here. You have word, can I have some quiet, please? Some people are talking a lot. We have 2 dimensions. We have word meaning and color letter, and therefore, if I give you a few hundred examples on the left side, it'll take you so long to take it. If I give you a few hundred examples on the right side, it'll take longer. It takes longer because you're processing 2 dimensions and using executive function. So we have here the same theme here. You're processing multi-dimensions, and you have to select which one predicts it. This is the trail making test. This is a very easy test. The goal is to make a trail. So you're given this. It has 25 numbers. 1, 2, 3, where's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And you complete the test, and it takes you so long to do it. Now, there's no right or wrong answer here. There's no optimal speed. But the point is, here we are. The point is, the test B takes longer than test A because there are two dimensions, and that requires executive function. So you have 1A, where's 1A, and 2B, and 3C, and 4D, and 5E. The test B always takes longer than test A, and the reason it takes longer is because executive function's involved. What's measured in this test is the difference between the two tests, and these tests are used diagnostically. It will predict how well you can recover from a stroke and other things. So I've given you three examples. In all three examples, there's been multidimensional processing. In the Wisconsin card sorting test, you've processed color, number, and letter. In the trail making test, you've processed number and letter, and in the Stroop interference test, you've processed letter color and word meaning. In all these tests, you're processing several dimensions. You're continuously selecting which dimension drives things and which dimension doesn't. That's executive function, and that's what I claim is what's giving higher order, the higher order flavor to anything in pedagogy. All right, let's give the first example. This example is modeling. Everyone knows modeling is higher order. Those are the core standards in case you're curious. A few years ago, still today, people are very upset about the performance of people in K through 12 in America, and people got together and say, let's create core standards. States will adopt these. They'll be higher order, they'll be uniform, and it will increase education. And you can find a description of the core standards there. I come from Maryland, and they're very popular there. One of the core standards in mathematics is not to just teach algebra, but to teach algebra with modeling. So I'm not introducing modeling, but I'm explaining why it's higher order. Let's look at its higher order because it involves two dimensions. So let's look at a typical algebra problem. Amy purchases for her friends 4 peanut bags. So if I model the price of peanut bags by P, that becomes 4P. And she also purchases 1 quart of orange juice. If I model the price of orange juice by Q, it's plus 1Q. The N stands for plus. 4 stands for equal, $6. So 4P plus 1Q equals 6. What I've done here is translated the English into algebra, and that requires executive function. Had Amy purchased 1 peanut bag and 4 quarts of orange juice, it would have cost $9. So 1 peanut bag is 1P, 4 quarts of orange juice is 4Q. It would have cost 9, and that's a separate equation. How much does a peanut bag and orange juice quart cost? So you're solving for P and Q. I will not do that now. All I'm pointing out is that you're dealing with multi-dimensions, and that's why modeling is challenging. Okay. Now I want to give you the 3 examples. I promised to give you examples from math, so I'm going to give you an example from a course I teach. I'll give you examples from writing, and I'll give you an example from foreign language translation. But besides executive function, I need a concept of skill competency. Now, it's very strange. I've looked through the pedagogic literature. They use skills all the time. They say we have to give people skills. These are skills. I've never seen the word skills defined in the pedagogic literature. Maybe I haven't looked hard enough. I did find it defined in the psychological literature. An atomic skill competency, that's my abbreviation, but it's any activity that through practice has a decreased error rate and an increased speed. And let's look at some examples. Reciting the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E. Well, the first time you do it, maybe you fumble on a few letters, maybe you make a few errors. So there's error, and it takes a while. After a while, you'll do it smoothly. When you can do it smoothly, you've acquired a skill competency. It's not a very important skill competency, but you can recite the alphabet. Let's say plug-in formula. I could give you a formula, I can give you some values and ask you to plug it in and get an answer. Well, the first time you do that, you may fumble. In fact, some people fumble for many years. But if I concentrated on it, I could teach you how to do it. You could do it quickly enough. You could do it without error. If all I ask you to do is plug in a formula without any modeling or anything else. Things like grammatical conjugation, to agree in subject and predicate, or various other things, I could drill you on them, and drill is a known word with skills, and I could get you to do it. Recognizing passive and active, that's another thing. People may not be aware of it. A person shows a person a composition. They say, you keep on using the passive. They don't know what you're talking about. You could train them. At first, they wouldn't be good enough, but after a while, it's mechanical. You can get it. Let's give some non-examples. Writing an essay is not a skill. It's not something that you do at a certain rate. If you keep on doing it, you're not going to get faster. And it's not something that's right and wrong. It may be composed of other skills, but it itself is not a skill competency. A complex math problem is not something where you just plug in a formula. You have to think about it. You have to think how to solve it. You need an aha experience. It's not something that has a known performance speed. It's not something that's right or wrong. One person may solve a problem differently. Paragraph development. Now that's interesting. I'm going to show you later. There are a finite number of ways of developing paragraphs, but that makes it a skill competency, but not an atomic skill competency, because you can divide it up into other skill competencies. I brought one other example. Changing passive to active is a skill competency, but not an atomic skill competency. There are 4 methods. I think Graham and Graham give them in their very excellent book. Let me show you an example. If I say, this presentation appears to be clear, well, that's a passive statement. If I wanted to correct the passivity and make it active, I could do it in 4 ways. I could say, Hendel is presenting clearly, so I made it active. You could also take the object of the sentence, the presentation, and make that the subject. The presentation clearly presented the material. That's a second technique. There are 2 other techniques. I could teach you each of those techniques. So the point is I could teach you 4 techniques. Together they form a skill competency, and the individual ones are non-skill competencies. I just wanted to go over one little thing, because skill competencies are generally looked down on, and they're not thought of as higher order. So there was a very beautiful paper, the Geoghegy paper in 2008, which appeared in the National Academy of Sciences, which created a sensation, Improving Fluid Intelligence with Training on Memory. Let me just briefly look at it. This paper dealt on experiments. You test, let's say, seniors and other people for how good their memory are. So you might present A, B, B, A, B, A, and say, when does this letter resemble the letter 2 letters back? Geoghegy thought, and her team thought of presenting numbers and letters, and there you have the 2 dimensions. So you might see 3A, you see it for 3 seconds, it vanishes from the screen. Then you see 4B, you see it for 3 seconds, it vanishes from the screen. Then you see 3B for 3 seconds. You have to recognize that the 3 and 3B resembles the 3 and 3A, and you click the number button. Then you see 5A, which does not resemble the 4 and B. You see 5B, which resembles the B in 3B, 2 back, and you click the letter button. And if you saw 5A, you'd remember the 5A here, and it resembles a letter and number. Now, this is a skill. What they did here is they presented sessions of 20 each. They gave several people practice on it, and after a while, they got good on it, which is what happens with a skill. They improved in performance and speed. The surprising thing was not that they improved, but that their fluid intelligence, their general intelligence increased before and afterwards. In other words, this increased intelligence. And one reason is it involved executive function. I just wanted to mention there are many other results all over the place now. They're doing them with seniors because people want seniors to think, otherwise they have dementia. That's something from the American Geriatric Society. It's a 10-year follow-up on the active experiment, which involved 3,000 adults in 6 cities. There are many papers on GIST. The key result is that reasoning and speed processing improvement is retained 10 years later, and their performance on improvement on ADLs, that's daily living activities. That's very important for seniors. Can they dress themselves? Can they bathe themselves? And other things. So I'll just briefly describe it. They pulled in a bunch of seniors in 1998. They gave them 11 one-hour sessions over 5 weeks. They said the sessions were performance, like I've been talking about, reasoning and memorization. And after the test, they had better faculties in these areas. The point is, 10 years later, 2008, they tested them. They still had better faculties in speed processing and reasoning, not in memory. Okay, so much for ASCs. Let me get to my approach to pedagogy. Pedagogy is training for analysis of multidimensional problems. So when I teach, I want several dimensions there, and I'm going to teach which dimension is the right one for the problem. And the way you analyze a multidimensional problem, what are the individual dimensions? Each of them should be a skill competency. So you have a collection of skill competencies, you identify them, and then you train the students into multidimensional processing. The function of the instructor is to identify what skill competencies the student needs, and as we'll see, that's not always done, and to train the student in multidimensional complex problems, and that's also not always done. So let me give you an example. This is mathematics, but it shouldn't bother you. Here's the problem. Price the following annuity. By price, I mean how much money will I need in the bank today to make the payments. I want to make a payment of $5,000 in 1 year, $5,000 in year 2, $5,000 in year 3, $6,000 in year 4, $7,000 in year 6, $8,000 in year 7. Now, when I teach this, the first approach is to identify the atomic skill competencies. I haven't found a textbook that says there are 3 things you need. If you look at the textbooks, they say you need this, you need this, you need this. Those things are included and 15 other things are included. The student is not told you need the following things, you need what you learned beforehand. The 3 skill competencies are how to price an annuity that's level. It pays X dollars every year, so it's level in payment. Or an increasing annuity pays X dollar, like $1 the first year, $2 the second year, $3 the third year. And the third type of annuity is decreasing, like $10 the first year, $9 the second year, $8 the third year. If you have those things, you have the other things taught in the course. Usually deferral is the only other thing you'll need. Can I start the level of annuity 5 years from now and still price it? You have the basic building blocks. You don't need anything else. Now, books love to say, well, the course is not finite. You need lots of other things. But my position is you should be telling them this. What do? I teach the symbols, the formula, the calculator, the proofs, and the justification. So if I give them a problem, price an annuity for a person age 65 that gives them $10,000 every month for 30 years, they can press something in 5 seconds and get an answer on a calculator. That's a skill competency. And as I said, skill competencies themselves are not lower order. Let me go back to my problem. My problem was to give $5,000 in year 1, $5,000 in year 2, $5,000 in year 3, $6,000 in year 4, $7,000 in year 5, $8,000 in year 6. When I teach this, I break it up into 2 skill competencies. One is to give $5,000 every year for 6 years. Now that's the level annuity, which I just spoke to you about. I also will give an increasing annuity 1, 2, 3 in years 4, 5, and 6. So in years 1, 2, and 3, they have only payments from one annuity, and they have $5,000, $5,000, and $5,000. In year 4, they have $5,000 from the level annuity, $1,000 from the increasing annuity, 5 and 1 make 6, and we get the $6,000. In year 5, they get $5,000 from the level annuity, $2,000 from the increasing annuity, they get 7. In year 6, they get $5,000 from the level annuity, $3,000 from the increasing annuity, they get 8. Since these are things they can do in 5 seconds on their calculator, if they've been listening to me, they add the sum of these 2, and then they have this new annuity. So this is actually how I teach. If you'll notice, I gave no formulas because I tell them to read the formulas themselves. I spend my time teaching them thinking. Let me just look at this and compare it to some other books. So I looked at a book called Kellison. This book was so good that for 13 years, no one competed with it. It was the only book on interest theory. The ASC are in the text. They're not listed as 3. They list 5 or 6 other things because they start reviewing and other things. It's not a list. Here's a box. Here are 3 things you have to know. There are no multidimensional problems in the text. It's in the homework problems. And I found this especially in older books. The instructor does formula teaching, and the homework is to discover the multi-part breakdown on your own. In other words, you teach this and say, well, I've taught you everything, and you go do the multidimensional problems. In my opinion, that's wrong, because the function of the teacher is to teach the multidimensional problems. Some students will get it, some students will not get it. You should be teaching this in class and then giving more complex and different examples and seeing if they can get it. Let me look at another book. This is Daniel Valor. This is approved by the Mathematical Association of America. It's one of the 4 books with Kellison that's approved for the interest theory section of the Society of America actuary exams. What they do is very obnoxious. They have this 2-part thing that everyone finds hard. So instead of teaching them to think, they invent a new formula, a new skill competency, which has 2 parameters. Okay, there's a little bit of challenge. And they show you, they sit and train you how to apply the formula with 2 parameters to solve a collection of problems. Now, there is some analysis there, but what they've done is they've replaced the multi-part problem with executive function by a new formula which has no or little executive function. To me, executive function, the multi-component problems, so you do not find them as a major part of text. I think there's one problem in Daniel Valor that has it in passing. They don't present it as two timelines. They just assume the student notices it. So this point of view may seem obvious, but it's not exactly espoused by the text, and very often, at least in mathematics, they get around it by creating a new formula and a new skill, and that's incorrect. You have to stop at some point and say, this is what you have to learn, this is where you have to think. And I have students come to me and say, well, why can't I use the formula in the book? And I tell them, you don't understand. You're going to take the Society of Actuary test, and they're going to give you formulas you've never seen before, situation you haven't seen before, because they know the formulas you've been learning. You have to learn how to think. So much for mathematics. Let me just summarize. I believe in identifying the skill competencies. I request memorization at home. The major teaching task is to spend time sharing analysis in class and then giving them homework problems. The goal of teaching and the homework and the test, the multi-part analysis. One other feature of this, there were no formula up front, and the same in my class. I spent my time teaching multi-part problems. It's sort of a flipped classroom. You go learn the formulas, I'll teach you how to think instead of the opposite. Okay, let me try and finish the other examples. This is writing. I actually found a textbook that does what I say should be done. Writing good prose, a simple structural prose. The book structure is sentences, paragraphs, and essays. And the grammar's in the appendix. The book focus is on complex organization. It's not like other college writing books where there's a lot on grammar, like Strook and White or the other things. They spend their time teaching you. So there are 4 types of sentences, 5 types of paragraphs, and certain essays, and they tell you how to do it. Rather than give you a lecture on this, which I don't have time, I'm going to go into a paragraph. I adapted this paragraph from the book. Jim passed several actuarial exams. He was immediately hired. His success was due to taking good prep courses and spending a lot of time studying and practicing. Indeed, during his period of study, he did not go to any parties. That's a well-formed paragraph. How is it made? Jim passed actuarial exams. That's the topic sentence. What is the relationship between the second sentence, he was immediately hired, and Jim passed several actuarial exams? Well, 1 and 2 is action and consequence. Consequence is a method of developing a topic sentence. The word immediately is a linking phrase, and that helps the reader. Let's look at the third sentence. His success was due to taking good prep courses and spending a lot of time studying and practicing. The relationship between sentence 3 and sentence 1 is cause. Cause and result is another type of sentence development. In sentence 3, I have take good prep courses and spend a lot of time studying and practicing. That's an example of parallel development. And in 3b, I have a lot of time studying and practicing. That's listing examples. All these methods are methods you are taught to develop individual sentences or sentence pairs. You spend a third of the semester on sentence pairs, a third of the semester on paragraphs, then you go and write essays. Indeed, during his period of study, did not go to any parties. The fourth sentence is supporting data to the third sentence. And I can go into this as a type of paragraph. Okay, that's all I wanted to say on this. This is from my, as I said, from a doctoral thesis, but what I'm doing here, let's go over the basics. This is the Bible. People know the 5 books of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heaven and earth. Rashi is an acronym for the first biblical commentator on words and phrases as well as topics. R stands for Rabbi, S stands for Solomon, I stands for Isaac. So he went through the Bible, and on each phrase, he wrote down 4 or 5 words explaining them. And the problem is, his comments are very terse. Are there underlying rules? What I've tried to do is develop 10 atomic skill competencies with executive function. So let me show you a few of them. You could have two-ness in words, sentences, or paragraphs, or in disciplines. So let me give you an example. There's a verse in Genesis 42. Some people were jailed, and they didn't know the jailer was listening to them while they were talking because they were talking in Hebrew, and the jailer spoke Egyptian. Rashi's comment is the word listening here doesn't mean listen, but means understand. He obviously heard them. He was standing right there. They were saying, oh, it's terrible, we were jailed, they're going to get us on this and this. He obviously heard them. He understood the Hebrew. They didn't know he understood them. So the word listen which normally means just to hear. Here means to understand, and that's an example of a homonym, something that could have 2 possible meanings. And it's like stroop, it's something with, as I said, 2 possible meanings. Another example, these are called hyponyms. and it's part of the WordNet project, which is developed by Princeton, in which we look at word pairs. Let me just tell you a little bit about this. Things like rose, lily, daisy, they are all hyponyms. They're all examples of the category flower. And you'll find loads of categories and hyponyms on WordNet, which is something at the Princeton website. Flower and daisy, for example, are hypernyms. It's a member of a class. And you can go through this. So one of the things that Rashi does is he defines frying pan and pot. He does this in Leviticus 2. They're talking about sacrifices. What people overlook here is he defines things in pairs. He didn't just tell you that this word means frying pan, this word means pot. He always defined things in pairs, and defining things in pairs is basically using a hyponym approach to word translation. By defining them in pairs, you get the two dimensions you need. By the way, I've asked people the difference between a frying pan and pot. They always tell me a frying pan is to fry, a pot is to cook. And that's the functional definition. Rashi gives a definition based on form. He says a pot is the utensil with height, and the frying pan has less height, and that's the way you recognize it. But I just wanted to show you an example of this. Here's an example, again, tunis in words. There's a sentence in Numbers 12, Miriam and Aaron speaks. Now it should be Miriam speaks or Miriam and Aaron speak. You have a plural subject and a single predicate. And that occurs in the Bible, and people overlook it. Rashi introduced a principle here. When you have a plural subject and a single predicate, then the first of the people in the subject instigated the action, the second one tagged along. In other words, they weren't both participating in this conversation. Miriam was driving and Aaron was saying, you're right, you're right, you're right. And that's just an example of some of the ways things go here. But in each of these cases, you have on the one hand skill competencies, things I could teach you at, and multiple dimensions. Let me give you a few more examples. Some of them have been referred to in other parts of the conference. Referencing is a very important thing. Verse 26:5 said a few Jews went down to Egypt, while Genesis 46 gives a list of the people. So if you go back to the second source and count, you'll find a few people with 70. And this happens all the time. One of the examples of higher order in almost all courses, can you go to sources, can you document things, can you reference things? I've heard that at least 5 times while I was here during the conference. This is another method. This is a method called parallelism. It's very popular in Mid-Eastern poetry. There's a verse I left out the chapter here, Genesis 49. In the Messianic era, things will be so plentiful that you'll wash your clothes in wine instead of water, and you'll wash your sauce in the blood of grapes. Now, blood of grapes corresponds to wine. What's a sauce? Well, you can look it up in the dictionary, and Rashi already tells you it's not in the dictionary because it never occurs in the Bible. So what does it mean? You can't get it through etymology. He says you wash your clothes in wine and your sauce in blood of grapes. So he says sauce is a type of clothes. And this comes from the parallelism of the verses. There's an object here of the word wash. That's clothes here, and sauce in the second half. Wine is the indirect object, and here blood of grapes is the indirect object. And I'll give you 2 more examples. Sometimes sentences contradict. This is a lot of fun because it's the essence of executive function. You come down to talk. Let's say if no one was here today, well, I'd know I'm in the wrong room. I'd go to another room. Very often we find contradictions. Executive function helps us. The Levites served in the temple starting at 25 is a verse in 8:24. The Levites served in the temple starting at 30 in Numbers 4:2. Well, is it 25 or 30? Rashi resolves this by saying they actually came to the temple at 25 and started a 5-year training program which ended at 30, and then they go in to serve. But the point is he's making his comment based upon a multidimensional analysis and using executive function. I've given you tunis in words, in sentences, in paragraphs. I'm not going to give you an example because I spoke about other things. In disciplines, very often, the traditional way of doing biblical scholarship is to make comments on biblical passages based on other Near Eastern cultures. And of course, that's multidimensionality. There are 2 other rules I have that are based in symbolism. I'll just give you one other. There's a verse in one of the chapters. God spoke to Aaron and gave him some command. He said, priests should not come in to serve in the temple drunk. No big deal in that. But if you do a database inquiry, how a paragraph's introduced, 86 times you find God spoke to Moses, only 2 times you find God spoke to Aaron. The fact that that's an anomaly suggests something, and again, That's an example of executive function where you're using your feel for how paragraphs begin to understand something. In this case, the previous paragraph describes how Aaron's sons died because they offered a sacrifice they shouldn't do. Then we find God telling Aaron, let priests not serve drunk, and the obvious comment is they were drunk, they thought they could do anything anyone else could do, they thought they could be the high priest, they offered a sacrifice and they died, and therefore God rewarded Aaron, who has accepted their death, by giving him the rule. Anyway, I just wanted to show you, this is both literary analysis and translation, but basically you're using skill competencies and executive function by just adding something. Okay, I think I'll skip the last part about homework, but let me just close by mentioning the other taxonomies. The goals in all the pedagogical taxonomies are to differentiate higher and lower educational skill. The oldest approach is theoretical. The later approaches, starting with about the 90s, are research-based. Modern development has showed the equivalence of various approaches. My approach is functional and based on brain function. So let me just go over. I had a whole session here, but I couldn't possibly do it in the time allotted. Everyone knows about Bloom and Bloom-Anderson. There are 6 categories: knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, evaluation. I'll just mention how Anderson replaced some of these and changed the order, and people are trained verbs, and if you look at something, you could say, oh, you're teaching knowledge, you're teaching remembering, you're teaching synthesis, you can evaluate everything. Webb had 4 levels of knowledge. He has a depth of knowledge, and just one example, a person named Hess, Susan Hess, looked at Webb and Bloom. She created a matrix, the 4 depths of knowledge, the 6 levels of Bloom, and she analyzed several thousand homeworks in K through 8 in English and math. And she says, we have several thousand homeworks here. What part of the matrix are they in? Are they doing higher order homework, or are they doing memorization homework? And you can find her paper, and, well, the result shouldn't surprise you. We're doing too much memorization and lower order things. But the point is, there's a lot of analysis going on with these. I'll just mention Marzano. Marzano said, so Bloom existed in 50, Marzano in 2000, and Marzano said, what are you all thinking theory for? We have thousands of papers, we train industry, we train students, we know it works, we know it doesn't work. And this is a list of things that works. Similarities and differences, that's the best thing you can to make training effective. That's, of course, an executive function. Note-taking, for example, in the Wisconsin card sorting test, if I was taking notes, I'd say, well, that's a number, that's a letter, that's a color. Note-taking, whether you like it or not, you're abstracting and looking at dimensions. Effort and recognition is important. I haven't spoken about it today. Practice, I've spoken about practice for skill competencies. Non-linguistic representations means you're using multiple dimensions of your mind, like the Stroop interference test or the trail-making test, number and letter. Cooperative learning is very popular, and a lot of people have spoken about it. I'm not talking about it. Objectives and feedback, hypothesis, and advanced organizers. So these are the things that Marzano thinks makes training effective. And I'll just close. This is my last slide. I won't do the homework now. I don't think I have more time than this, right? Okay. My approach has been atomic skill competencies and multi-part analysis. That corresponds to memorization and performance in Bloom-Anderson, and analysis and synthesis in Bloom-Anderson, multi-part analysis. And what I'm doing is I'm concretizing this. Instead of using vague terms like analysis and synthesis, I'm saying, let's get down and identify them in terms of parameters and predictors. I also compare myself to Marzano. I believe in homework practice for atomic skill competencies, and multi-part analysis, like the problem I showed you, is looking at similarities and differences in advanced organizers. So in conclusion, the last part is something I've spoken about in past conferences. I won't speak again. I've tried to show you that you can approach higher order pedagogy by looking at a multidimensional representation of the knowledge, looking at which dimensions are predicting various outcomes, identifying the finite number of skill competencies needed, and teaching the students how to take a complex situation and look at the various dimensions.